Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Monastery Dropouts Story Hour. Uh, we're here with Josh and, of course, myself, Daniel, and we'll be talking today about adventures in Myanmar. We had met a monk at a yoga retreat center we worked at, and we were invited to go out to Myanmar. Josh went out there first. Josh, why don't you tell us about your trip and your experiences with the monk Cielo?
Yeah. So I was at the yoga center. It's called Song of the Morning in Michigan. It's in like the North Woods, and it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. And so this monk came by. He came to visit as a traveling teacher, and I had been there for almost a year at that point, and I'd been meditating every day at the yoga center. It was more of like a meditative type of yoga than physical yoga. And then someone said, "Hey, if you ask this monk, he may let you travel with him to Asia." And so I was like, "Whoa, that would be amazing!" Because this guy, when you came into his presence, you could just feel this like energy and power with him. And he was one of those enlightened sages that Dan and I have been lucky to meet. Several of these people over the decades. So I asked. He didn't. He didn't speak very. His English was okay, so I asked his assistant Amika, and then he said I could go. And so actually, a group of Americans went with him to Burma. And so, Dan, did you want to talk a little bit about your experience with Cielo?
Sure. Yeah. When I met Cielo, yeah, he was doing those personal interviews. And the interesting thing about my initial experience with him is that I had no interest in going to Myanmar.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but what happened, I had a personal session with him. He said some very nice things. I left the personal session. I was hanging out with my friends whose house he was holding the sessions in. And he came out of the room and he got a snack and then he started talking to me. And young man, you should come to Burma. And and as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, I should go to Burma. And so
Yeah.
then
You're like the
that
only
was
person he's ever asked in the whole time. Everyone else is like begging him to go, and he's like, Dan, you should come with me.
how.
Um, it's actually very interesting that you say that. When you brought it up, having a personal session with him, when I would have personal sessions with him, it actually kind of reminded me of watching the movie The Matrix, where like there was so much energy and power that the room would kind of fade into a spaciousness, so you could see the physical room, but it was almost like energy just like pulsating. He was a very, very powerful presence, one of those people that you associate with saints throughout time. And he just knew you would ask him a couple questions, and he would know insights into you that no one could really know. He could look deep into you. So he was one of those people that just being in his presence was a blessing, and you just felt like when you wanted to meditate, if you were in his presence, you would just immediately go into deep meditation. You didn't have to try like the meditations I would go to in his presence would be like meditations I would have like there were days at the yoga center I'd meditate for like 3 or 4 hours, and you'd get into like a very, very deep, powerful meditation, an expanded state. With Cielo, with his presence, you could just do that much more easily. His energy just kind of cleared out everything else that was blocking you from getting into that deeper state. Um, so for me, when someone said like you should ask him, I was like, yeah, I should ask him. um, and
Yeah, I agree with that.
and I was in my early 20s, and so I had nothing holding me back from them.
Mm.
And so the main story I want to talk about tonight. There's a lot of stories from Burma because we were with this saint for quite a while, and so amazing things would just happen like periodically, and it was like his normal life. But because you were with him, things would happen. So he had a connection with a saint that had been in Burma. I believe he died like in the 50s or 60s or something like that. But he's like a national icon in Burma, which is Myanmar. And this saint, his name is Bomagan, and the saint always smoked cigarettes. And Cielo, the monk that we traveled with, he always smoked cigarettes, and so they kind of had this like interesting connection. And so when there were statues around in Burma of Bomagan, because he's like considered a saint in that country, Cielo would always put his cigarettes in the hand of Bomagan, which was always humorous to us. But my story about Bomagan that I wanted to talk about was one of the more powerful experiences in my entire life. And at that time, I'd started meditating like around 15, 16, like very intermittently. But when I was at the yoga center, I started meditating like minimum an hour a day, and sometimes like 3 or 4 hours a day, depending on what day it was. And a lot of times I'd leave meditation and go like sit in my closet, which is like this tiny little rooms with tiny little closets, but it was completely dark in there, and like the sound was diminished. And so I would just sit in there and meditate. And so that was a time in my life where I started to feel more energies. I started to feel chakras. And I started to get an idea of like, I'm like, oh, I feel my third eye. It feels like a little bit of pressure here. Or I feel like my heart, I feel like love in my chest. But it was just like the very beginnings of those experiences you have when you start to feel those energy centers in your body open. And so that was, when I tell you the story about Bomagan, that's where like everything like shifted in my knowledge of what chakras were and what they can do. And so the story with Bomagan is, what was the name of that city, Dan?
Chaitio.
Yeah, so it was a city called Chaitio, and they had these huge, huge boulders, like unbelievable. Like they just did not fit in the local atmosphere. They're like sitting on the edge of like 1,000-foot cliff, but they were like, I don't even know, like multi-ton, huge, huge boulders. And there's a whole myth surrounding how they got there, that like some supernatural beings put them there, because they just look totally, totally out of place, like just monstrous boulders sitting on the edge of a cliff, and they've been there for like thousands of years. And people put golden, like a little golden leaf on it as like a blessing. So we were in this, we were monks, and we were in this city or temple area. And when we were in the temple area, Cielo would have a seat, like a special seat, and then we would gather around him, kind of like if you thought of like Jesus' disciples gathering around him. And he, as when we went to different places, he would talk and like give us blessings. And monks and people would come up to him in those places, and then they would ask for a blessing. So we were sitting there meditating, and he was talking, and all of a sudden he stopped. You could see him kind of move a little bit, and he couldn't really know physically where someone was, because he was in this, we're all in this room. But he goes, "Oh, Bomagan's here." And so we we're all like excited, because he told us some stories about Bomagan and like amazing things that had happened. And so we're like, "Oh, cool." And then he said that he takes different forms, so we'll see what form he takes. And this young yogi from the mountains came in, and he had like really, really long hair. And he came up to Cielo and got a blessing. And I was kind of like, I was kind of confused, because I had felt energy before, and I had been around saints before. And usually when a saint comes in the room, you can feel your energy shift and open up. And I didn't feel that with this young yogi. I was like, this is Bomagan? This is so weird. I'm like, okay. But then the yogi left, and I was like, well, where's Bomagan? Cielo just mentioned it. And then all of a sudden, this old monk, a Burmese monk, came in. He was kind of walking with a stick, and he was very, very old. And he came in, and Cielo was like, everyone go up to Bomagan. He's right there. Like, get a blessing from him. So we went up to Bomagan. There's like all of us monks, like, I don't know, 10 or 15 of us standing around him. And he starts speaking, and his English was like, you could understand a few words, but you couldn't really understand it. It was kind of garbled. And so, but you pick out a few words, and he was talking about how we were instruments of this coming age, and like a new spiritual age was arising, and that we needed to be a part of this. And so he told us like, you need to focus on like your spiritual life, so you can be a part of this new age, and usher in this energy basically. And the interesting thing is, I couldn't really understand what he was saying totally. And like the monks later, we kind of talked and pieced it together, what exactly he was saying, but it didn't really matter what he was saying, because basically what it felt like, when your energy center is open, you either feel pressure, or you start to feel them moving, and
Mhm.
it feels like blissful or joyful, and in your heart, like you feel like this like pressure, and it feels like a lot of love, and you start to like love everything around you. And I had felt like a little bit in my chest, like I guess like a little bit like this before, like in my meditations. But like as he talked and the longer he talked, it felt like this swirling thing. Like it almost encompassed my whole body, and it went like like my arm's length around me. And it was like someone was taking an oar of like water and just like whooshing it around. And I just felt like my physical body was like almost frozen because like my muscles were like tensing up from all of this energy like swirling through me. And I was almost like I had all these tears in my eyes, and like the tears were starting to come down my eyes, and I was just like, oh my gosh. And so I was just kind of I was fixated on him, like looking at him. But like the words that he was saying it didn't really matter to me because it was like what he was transmitting into us. And I was like, huh, is this me? Or I thought about it for a second. I'm like, is this only me? And I looked around at the other monks, and there's people just like weeping and crying, and they're like, they're like looking up at him, like, thank you, thank you. And so it was just very, 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 very powerful experience. And I wanted to bring that up tonight as like a special experience that I had in Burma, um, because um, since I got back from Burma, when I first came back from Burma, I would talk about my experiences, my spiritual experiences, and like people did not understand them, and they kind of mocked them and like made fun of them. And so that was in my early 20s. And so I just stopped talking about spiritual experiences. And like, with Dan, I would talk to him about spiritual experiences that were happening, but I kind of just shut down. And I just didn't want to like give these most sacred moments of my life to people who didn't understand them, and like they just kind of thought they were silly. And so I just stopped talking about them. And then in the past couple months, I felt the presence of Bomagan again. And it was this idea that we need to start a channel to talk about these experiences so people can recognize them. And like now that we're talking about it, it's like this spiritual age is coming on, and we're starting to go deeper into this new change in spiritual energy. And so we need to be a part of like talking to people about these things so people understand the things that can happen, and the things that happen to us, hopefully they're inspiring to other people so that they can have deeper spiritual experiences.
Yeah, my feeling is it's time for these things to be brought out into the open.
Yep.
Um, Many of them are somewhat, but it's like you said, a lot of us just kind of keep these things to ourselves. But you and I are both being gently prodded to open up.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that we've sought these things out at a young age. And so we sought these teachers out, and the universe, because we were seeking so intensely, we like these new teachers would just kind of come to us, and people would say, hey, there's this other saint over here, you should go check them out. And then so we would
Right.
go there and do it. And so we would travel to different parts of the country, and like some of the saints would come over from India or Asia, and so we would go see them somewhere in the United States. And so we've had a lot of experiences with true saints. And um, I don't think a lot of people have a frame of reference. And I think, and some of these people are still alive, like you can still see them and meet them. And so hopefully the people who are watching this do have the opportunity to meet some of these people.
Yeah, yeah, I hope so. So when you were feeling that stirring in your within your heart chakra, which was as big as a cartwheel at the time, did it feel like you were being? Do you think you were being cleansed? Do you think like maybe of
Yeah.
karma or blockages or?
Yeah. And so basically, I was coming from like my youth and like all the traumas or whatever, the things that happened when I was younger, and all the things, like all the mindsets that were given to me. And so I do feel that there was just a lot of like in my more subtle body, it was opened up. And it's hard to know, like pinpoint the situation because I was with Cielo for such a long time during that trip as well. Um, but once I left Burma and I went to the United States again, like basically everything just started shifting really quickly after that. Like my life, what I did with my life changed very rapidly in the next like 6 months after. So I think he was shifting a lot of karmic energy. He was opening up my more subtle body. And then, when that a lot of that stuff gets moved away, your what needs to happen for your future, for what your purpose is opened up more easily. So
Right.
I mean that wasn't the most powerful experience I ever had, but it was like a pivotal moment where I was like, oh, a shock. This is what a chakra can feel like. It doesn't. It's not. It's like the difference between like like one of those like twisty storms or like those dirt devils or whatever blowing up a little dirt and then like being in a tornado. It's like your whole body is like frozen and like you're like this energy is pouring through you and your heart is like so full of love. um, and so, yeah, I don't think that heart chakra has been that open since then. To be honest, like my other chakras have all opened, and I could feel those energies. But it was just a amazing experience.
I went to Myanmar twice myself. It was a different kind of trip because the trip you were on was specifically for monks, right? It was really
Mhm.
monk focused. And
Yeah,
the first trip I went on was a little bit more tourist focused. Most of the people were not monks. I think there was maybe four people who decided to become monks. And the second trip I was on, it was really just me and a couple other Japanese people. It wasn't really even a tour. It was just a trip. I just went with
yeah,
Cielo and Hamaka, and we went to a couple places. Um, I was lucky. I had a couple experiences with Bomagan. I didn't really know though. Cielo did not announce, "Oh, here's Bomagan." When I was at Chaitio, it was a sort of similar thing in that we were in the Chaitio monastery, and suddenly this old monk came in, and he just kind of slow, very old. I don't think he had a stick, and he walked in and he started talking, and it was a similar thing. And I thought, I didn't think he was speaking English, but somebody said no, he was speaking English, and I was like, I couldn't really understand anything he was saying. I just
yeah.
assumed he wasn't. I didn't assume most people in Myanmar did not speak
No,
English.
no.
And so I
I think it's a possibility to speak English because it was an old English territory at one
mm,
point. But a lot of people, most people didn't know what English was. They didn't speak English, so.
yeah, exactly. And so all I could remember is that the monk was talking for quite a while. And then when he left, though, he put his hand on each of our heads, the monks, as he was walking by, and he said, "May God have mercy on your soul." I thought that was so odd. I thought, did he just say that? What I think he said.
Yeah. You're
And
like, man, am I in trouble? Like, what's going on here?
And so my friend Eric, who was there, and he'd been on the monk trip with you the first time you went, so he kind of knew what was happening more. And he said, "Oh yeah, that was Bomigan." He's like, "What Buddhist monk says, 'May God have mercy on your soul'?"
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
thought that was pretty funny. And there was a couple other instances where I didn't realize it at the time, but it made sense when Eric told me later. He said, "Yeah, I think pretty sure that was Bomigan." There was
Yeah.
another time we walked all the way up a mountainside, and Cielo needed help getting up. So one of the assistants was helping him up, and that was fine. And then when we came down, though. About halfway down the mountain, we started to pass a very thin, very old man who uh, appeared to have a fake leg. And Cielo immediately took the man's arm, and he helped that man down the mountain the entire way, the entire rest of the way. And I thought that was so unusual because Cielo usually did not do things like that. Monks usually don't do things like that for ordinary people. And so when we got to the bottom of the mountain, he let go of the man's arm and walked ahead. And I remember I passed the man and I looked back, and I just can't forget that face. He had an intense, very intense look in his eyes. when I say intense look, I mean intense power coming from his eyes. Um,
Yeah.
and
That's oh, go ahead.
yeah, and
That's where that other monk that you're talking about, where he'd go, "Come on, Dan! Like a guy with one leg is walking up a mountain." Like
exactly.
maybe in Colorado that would happen, but like obviously not in Burma. Like someone's not gonna be walking up with like a peg leg up a
Yeah,
mountain.
it wouldn't have made sense. And yeah, his face, it didn't, it almost didn't look real. It almost looked like, a mask or something, like a caricature of a face. The features were so pronounced, and he had a thin beard and a very wide upper part of his head and a very narrow jaw, and just very intense look. And yeah, later Eric's like, "Wow, what'd you think of seeing Beaumont today?" And I said, "I don't remember seeing him." He said, "That guy in the mountain." I was like, "Oh, that was Beaumont." He's like, "Dan, why would a man with a fake leg live on a mountain?" And I was just so young and naive, and I was also not very energetically sensitive to things outside myself at that time.
Well,
I
I will
was,
say that a lot of saints they you will just feel the power radiating from them, and we can talk more about that in the future. But there's a saint that she comes from India, and we were waiting inside a building, and you could just feel the whole room shift, and it was really powerful. And they're like, oh, like she's driving up right now because you can feel it. And then all of a sudden, like 2 minutes later, she walks in the building. And a lot of scenes are like that, where they just like let that radiate out of them. But some of them, I think that's how Bomagan is. I think he doesn't reveal that because with him when we met him, I was kind of waiting for that shift to happen. I didn't feel it, and then as he was talking, then he blessed us as a group or individually, and then you really really felt it. And
yeah,
it's always shocking to me with these saints that you kind of wonder. You're like, if he can make my chakra open that wide by being 5 feet away from me, I'm like, what is he experiencing? Like, what kind of like heavenly realms and like what kind of dimensions does he like go into and live in? It's just one of those things that it's hard to even fathom.
right. Yeah, there's a lot of power going through those circuits.
Yeah, yeah.
There
I
was
guess. Yeah,
there was one other instance where I don't remember Eric or anybody talking about this, but we were at a bazaar in Myanmar, and it was with Cielo, same group, and I was hearing this beautiful music. It was all these kind of ragged stalls, open sewers, and just,
yeah,
really quite a poor place. But they had some wares, cloths and clothes and food and stuff. And but there was this hauntingly beautiful music. I was just like, wow, what is that? Sounds so nice. And that, looking back on that experience, I can remember there was an energy. I probably assumed it was Cielo's at the time. Now I actually don't think it was, because it was almost like the music itself had an energy that was just permeating the whole place, and it felt kind of dreamlike. So we're moving through, and then all of a sudden we come upon the music. You hear it louder and louder, and then we come upon this man, and it's almost like if a naked mole rat became a person. I mean, it was like it was this thin, very old man squatting, sitting cross-legged in what do you call it? Not a turban, but a loincloth. A loincloth. That was it. That was all he was wearing. He was very pale, like almost not albino though, but just like very pale, very old, completely hairless, bald, and blind. I couldn't see any eyes. And he was playing like a one-stringed instrument, almost like it would, sound would have been like akin to something like a violin. It's probably a real instrument. I just don't know what it was. But the music was just so beautiful, and Cielo, he was the only person I ever saw Cielo give money to. Gave money to this man, and I just thought, oh wow. And then, but I don't remember anyone mentioning that might have been Beaumont. But it was definitely some sort of a saint. If it wasn't Bomigan, it was some sort of a saint. And yeah, I just that was a fascinating experience. And
Yeah, yeah. My mind's being like tripped for like a lot of experiences that we had there, but we're getting close to our time, so maybe we'll just cut it there, and then we'll tell more stories as time goes on. So, uh, thank you everyone for joining us at Monastery Dropouts, and Dan, I always enjoy your views and your comments. So please put them in the comments below, and then we'll see you next time. Have
yeah,
a good
thanks very much, everybody.
Yeah, have a good night.